Yeah. So I'm familiar with the Thomas Kilmann conflict instrument, and it sounds similar from the standpoint of there are different kinds of things that people do, and that there are skill sets that are built around them, so that people can be more versatile, because there's a time and a place for everything.
Right.
Win at all costs isn't bad unless it's always win at all costs.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And the Thomas Kilmann's been around for a very, very long time. I've used that many, many times.
Yeah.
The biggest difference between those two, and I use both of them, one talks about style. Thomas Kilmann talks about, are you an accommodator? Are you a compromiser? Are you a competitor like a shark?
Yeah.
Are you, an avoider, etc., which is wonderful. And is very appropriate, choices that people make when they respond to conflict. And then, and so it talks a little bit about behaviors. The CDP gets very specific to specific behaviors. So, for example, constructive responses might be, how good are you to reaching out to others when there's a conflict? In other words, do you go, do I go to Kathy and say, Kathy, I'm really bothered by something that you said yesterday? But people will just they'll ignore it and let it just fester for a long time.
Yeah, they will.
Or they'll go and they'll tell everybody except for Kathy and hope that it gets back to her.
Exactly.
And
Which
we
is
know
even
from the
worse.
telephone game that if I tell Kathy
Right.
to do something, Carol Ann, then by the time it gets to Kathy, it sounds so different.
Oh yes.
Kathy's marching to Carol Ann's office like, I can't believe you said blah, blah, blah. And you're like, that's the farthest thing that I said to that.
Yeah.
Right. And people don't just tell the facts. People tell facts and they speculate about the future. And so, yeah, that's always a bad scene.
Yeah.
You know what? I've got a question, Patty. You spoke earlier, and I don't want to digress in the conversation, but you spoke earlier about how a lot of clients come to you after they're already in crisis. And so I was wondering if you maybe had 3 early indicators that we could throw out there for people who, they know they're having problems. They know their team is not as functional as it could be, but maybe they don't realize they need you. And so if they had these 3 early indicators, then they might be able to look at their team and say, oh, wow, I need Patty now.
Yeah.
I don't need to wait 6 months when...
I don't need to wait until the bridge has been burned completely.
Yeah. Everybody's on action plans.
I agree with that. I think that, when people are contacting me and saying that their team's been in conflict for 5 years, that's a major problem.
Right. I mean, it's a lot of damage to heal.
I tell people I'm not a miracle worker.
Right? I mean...
Okay, so Patty, mine is I can't coach people to have a soul.
Right.
I think that, early on, one of the things that people don't realize about conflict is that there's a before, there's a during, and there's an after.
Right.
So we know there might be a potential conflict coming up. There's a change going on in the team. There's a new member who's going to join the team. There's a hot topic that we know it's a taboo and we want it off. We don't even want to go there, and we know it's coming.
Right.
So how are we approaching it? So that's not necessarily where someone would come and get me, but it's the conflict competent leader and team that puts things in place before they start the conversation, so that it's respectful, it's constructive. So there's that before, we're preparing, we're recognizing, and we're getting in. Now we're in the conflict, we're in the conversation. There's maybe some differences of opinions, the level of conflict low intensity. Now maybe there's some misunderstandings between meetings, and it's this area, this level of misunderstanding where it can quickly turn into what we call the relationship conflict or personality conflict. We talked about that last week, where now one of the indicators is the conflict task focused and we're on the issue and we're having robust discussions and it's constructive and we're not shutting down, or now is this a conflict that's now taken away from the focus of the task and the issue at hand, and now we're focused on the conflict between personalities. Boy, you better get me in there quick or start dealing with something very quickly to turn that around, because once you get polarized with teams, now you have one side and you have another side against each other. It's just going to get even worse.
Messy.
And so that would be an early indicator. Is the conflict focused on having a robust conversation of the issues so that you can really come up with some problem solving and some solutions around that? Or is the conflict really focused on nitpicking, personality,
Right.
labeling, judging, gossiping?
Yeah.
And if you're seeing that, leaders,
Yeah.
this is an indicator that you either need to start addressing it right away openly, or that you need to bring someone in like me to help facilitate some of those conversations for you.
Because that can spiral out of control quickly.
Very quickly. I would say gossip is one of the larger indicators, and
speculation.
Yeah.
You know, what I find can tear a team apart, and this is where you have to come in, Patty, and help solve this situation, is, you know, not so much do people gossip, but people spend an enormous amount of time speculating about what's about to happen.
And why do they speculate?
Because they don't feel like they're in the know.
They're not in the loop. They don't feel like they've been communicated to by their leaders, especially if there's a change.
Or they don't trust what's been said to them. Because a lot of times I find that leaders come to the table and they're just like, okay, look, here's what we're doing. This is what it's all about. They are very transparent. They're open, or as best they can. And it falls on the ears of people who, they kind of bring a little bit of mistrust to the table.
Yeah.
And so that leader has an extra difficult time because they're bumping up against not only the trust issues of the corporation, but the trust issues of the person. Do you see that a lot where, you know, the corporation has trust issues for whatever reason, but also when you get those addressed, you have to come into and address the trust issues of the person?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been in really wonderful teams where the leaders are fantastic about being transparent. They're, you know, and they give the information as much as they have themselves. But because of that trust issue, and sometimes it's only one person on the team that has a trust issue, which can cause a major problem amongst the team members. So the strategy is, you know, first of all, to keep that line of communication open. Once they have that initial team meeting that says, this is the status, this is where we're at, you know, and then they either need to decide, do I have to have one-on-one meetings, you know, to continue developing trust with this employee? If they themselves are having a trust issue with their employee, they need to continue not ignoring it, but be proactive in how they're rebuilding trust with that employer, with that team. So yes, it goes both ways because so many times, especially when I'm talking to employees, and I work with the whole team, it's they against us, you know. And it's like, well, who's they? I used to have a
the
leadership
infamous
team.
they.
I'm like, but you're the leadership team. Well, they was upper management, but you're the leadership team, so you are they.
Yeah, you are them is what is it.
Yeah.
So what are the techniques or strategies you've used as a facilitator in working with teams that are in trouble?
Oh, awesome.
Well, the first, and there's a number of them. So we already talked about team agreement.
Right.
So we talked about that. We talked about establishing an accountability plan.
Yes.
So in other words,
that's great.
If a couple members in the team says, so-and-so always does such and such, and every time they do that, it just shuts us down. Okay. Granted. Now, own that and own the fact that you shut down. So next time that person does that, be accountable for shutting down and saying the appropriate thing to that person that's, you know, that gives them feedback. But every time you shut down and they continue, y'all just keep feeding into the cycle. So that accountability plan is own your stuff, you know, so we have a lot of conversation about that. The other number one thing is listening for understanding.
Oh, that's so big.
Instead of, you know how we always, you know, so if I'm talking to Carol Ann and we're in an argument, Carol Ann's already in her head thinking about exactly what she's going to say back to me.
I'm listening to be right.
Exactly, right?
And she's not listening to understand, she's listening to respond.
Right.
That's true.
So how does she really get present with me and focus on what I'm saying? She doesn't have to agree. But to really understand my meaning, to understand what it is I'm really trying to say, and then, before she even says her opinion, to validate, to acknowledge, to summarize, to do some active listening technique that says, Patty, this is what I just heard you say. Obviously, you're frustrated, you're angry about blah, 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 and I'm sorry that you feel that way. And most importantly, do not then say, but.
I know. That nullifies everything.
Get that butt out of there, okay?
And Yeah.
And this is how so it really takes some structured. It probably even feels awkward to people sometimes because they're not used to listening to understanding.
Yeah.
That's one of the number one things people say all the time. They don't understand me. They don't feel. They don't know where I'm coming from. And yet, when they communicate, they don't communicate in the way that allows the other person to hear them.
Exactly.
Because they're shitting them. Remember we talking about don't shit on people?
Right.
WLD. So if they're doing that, they're not communicating to be heard either. So that's one of the biggest things I work on is how do we communicate to be heard and how do we listen to understand?
That's so important. I've got a listening exercise, Patty, actually that I do with my Improved Performance Now group, the executive leadership program that I do, and one of their field works is to be aware of what it is that they're listening for. Are you listening to be right? Are you listening to respond? Are you listening so that you can say something important or to be funny?
Right.
But all the ways that we listen that aren't present and don't make the person feel validated. And what I heard you say, which I think is so important, is that you address not only this is what I heard you say, and here are the emotions I'm hearing behind it.
Right. It could be a reflection. Again, people are so afraid of emotions. Emotions are who we are as human beings. So it's okay to acknowledge the person's frustration, anxiety, or anger, if it's appropriate. So this is not about being kumbaya and touchy-feely.
Sure.
Right. The soft skill is now the new hard skill, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So having some emotional intelligence around that. There's a wonderful quote that I've heard a number of times, and it's one of my favorite, and it's from John Gottman, who's one of the marriage and family therapists. He's very well known. And I think it goes something like this. It says, if you're furious, you can't be curious. So if we're in a rage moment, an angry moment, we can't really hear the other person, and therefore we can't be curious about where they're coming from. And being curious means asking good, open-ended questions.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, you know what, Patty? We are out of time. Unbelievably. It just goes so fast. So I know that you have an event coming up. You want to say more about that again?
Yes.
Sure. The event that I have two actually.
Oh, right on. Awesome.
The one I've got coming up on January 27th here in San Antonio is on the keynote for the National Association for Women Business Owners. We're doing a topic on women in negotiation.
Oh, very good.
And so that's January 27th here in San Antonio. And then I'm following that up in February, starting February 15th, with a study group on women in negotiations, working with women business leaders and business owners about how do they ask, negotiate, and succeed. So, and that all has a lot to do with conflict and how they manage conflict and negotiate for what they want.
Well, guys,
that's awesome.
Patty also has a Blog Talk radio show, which we didn't bring up earlier. You can find more information about that on our website at lunchandlearnshow.com. And she just did she got an awesome interview with the author of the book Women Don't Ask, which is just an amazing book. And on the back cover of it, by the way, it talks about how women lose, what was it, Patty, $500,000 in salary from the get-go because they don't negotiate their salary in their first position.
Wow.
Yes, it's a cumulative. So by the end of their career, they have lost, $500,000 to sometimes even more because if they start off low, then over the course of the years of promotions and things, they're already way behind already.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a wonderful,
and that's a very relevant topic right now because we're hearing a lot in the news and in the press about how women still aren't being paid the same amount as the executives and all this. And Patty, what I heard you say is truly, we have the power to actually negotiate our way into something that we can feel respectful, we can feel powerful. And so it's not really about the boys getting paid more than the girls anymore. It's about us taking that power place, that empowered place, and actually negotiating what we think our value is.
Yes, and part of it is you don't have to be a biatch to do it.
Right.